Hi, John. We are going to dig into a coaching call that I actually had this past week that I definitely had a lot of takeaways from it. And I think as a team, we came back together and were able to just really think through ways that we could support this district and support this coach. So, just to kind of give everybody listening a summary of that call, I was supporting a coach who's working in a district with some really clear goals. They have been a part of the program, they have clear objectives, they know exactly what they're working toward and what they'd hope to see, what change they hope to see in the next 5 years, let's say. Their zones of focus, and they've really put in the work too. They've drafted a scope and sequence, and they have a lot of supports in place for their educators K-8. But when I was in this conversation, one thing that we always ask people, it's one of my favorite questions to ask, is at the end of this year, what change will you contribute to that will make you feel proud of the work you've done, help you believe that you're getting closer to those district goals and that your role has had an impact? And what the coach communicated is that in the scope and sequence that they've established for their educators, they have basically, a day 1 and 2 structure, where day 1, they deliver a task-based 3-part math lesson. But on day 2, that's when they are providing really explicit instruction in small group. They're giving opportunities for purposeful practice. Students are engaged in games and activities to reinforce the concepts. And what the coach articulated is that, by the end of the year, she'd love to see teachers and she'd like to support teachers in being able to use formative assessment in day 1 to drive that targeted small group instruction in day 2. So that students are receiving, right, that timely, effective instruction to address maybe misconceptions or gaps, which again, like a really worthwhile goal and really powerful work, particularly when you're talking about strengthening tier 2 instruction. But then when I was just asking the coach to describe their typical week, they only visit each site once a week.
Okay.
And so then, my initial wondering was, if your goal is to support assessment and support this 2-day model where formative assessment from day 1 is driving instruction on day 2, does it make sense to only be in that classroom once a week? And that was kind of where our conversation stemmed from.
Right. So their goal was to obviously and I think the other part of, I think what we've heard from this district's coaches before is, and this is common for many school districts across North America, is one of the most common things we hear when we hop on, say, a first call to hear about what's happening and where some of the pebbles are, is that they don't feel that there's traction in the changes they're trying to make. I think this coach also expressed that I'm trying to get in there and help teachers, understand the goals, also reach the goals, but also really, give these students the experience that they need to have to strengthen their understanding of mathematics. And it was a 2-day process, and we really wanted that 2-day process to happen in as much as we can. But they just weren't seeing traction. And what you uncovered, and when asking, is like, tell me about your day. What does your week look like? And when they said that we're hitting one school, a week, and then we're bouncing from class to class inside those schools, it sounds like they're not in that 2-day process to help a teacher see what it looks like on day 1 and then what it really looks like on day 2. So they might be doing a lot of day 1s and then leaving off day 2 and then not seeing them until a week later or sometimes longer than that. And then they go to another school and do the same thing. And so, I get why the structure, happens, is because it's like, okay, I got 5 schools to support. I got 5 days of the week. I'm just going to do some easy math here. And that's 1 day per week. And we want to blanket, the support we have, because we don't want to leave people out. We don't want to, in a way, you want to cover as much ground as possible. And it makes sense to structure that way. And it's also possible, this is the way, maybe if they've had coaching in the past. I know this particular district, brought on some coaches in the last, couple of years. But if they've had just, support in the past, maybe this is the way that they've structured in the past. This is our coaching model structure. And it makes sense to kind of blanket everybody, to kind of go, I'm gonna basically try to widespread my time. But what you're doing is you're going a mile wide and an inch deep. And that sometimes and especially in this case, because their structure doesn't actually align with their goal, that's a huge issue. So it's not even like just trying to widespread approach the support. This particular district, in stage 2 of our program is called optimize and sustain. So we look at what are the structures you're currently using to support your goals. Stage 1 is goal setting and designing and measuring. But in stage 2, it's like, what are we doing with our support, our time, our calendars, our sessions, our channels to actually put us in a great position to hit the goals? And it sounds like what you kind of uncovered with this group in this call was that, oh, wait a minute, like we've got a 1-day approach per week, but it's likely we're not seeing the 2-day lesson from start to end through with a teacher, which means like we're going even wider. We're going half an inch deep because we're not even getting to that second part of the lesson.
Yeah. And so really, I guess our question is, it's like a backwards design approach to lesson planning. It's like if our goal and what we'd like to see happen, the impact that we want to have this year is this, and we can articulate that change that we want to see. And we know how, and another important part, of course, of phase 2 is how will we know that it's happened? Right. So having a really clear vision of if the change we're hoping to achieve occurs, then this is what we'll notice. This will be the observable behaviors that will be happening in classrooms. Then ensuring that we're leveraging our structures in a way that are going to, our structure needs to work for us, not against us.
Totally.
And so kind of the question that I pose to you is, do we sometimes get so stuck in a structure or this idea of fairness or, wanting to be routined and regimented that we actually sacrifice our goal for that routine, that fairness, that predictability?
Yeah. And it's not, and I don't think it's like on purpose, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, I don't think it's like we're sacrificing our goal. Like I don't even think we realize that we're actually like putting our goal farther away because we're concerned with fairness and equal access to support. And if you listen to one of our previous episodes where we talked about going narrow, then that like going a little bit more narrow, which means you're not widespreading this approach. Like this, I think, your suggestion to this particular coach was, is it possible that we restructure, the way that you're supporting so that you could, at least at a minimum, be there 2 days in a row so that you could see start, end, or part 1, part 2, and work through that with that teacher or the teachers that they're going to bounce around to. Like the other thing is that they were bouncing from classroom to classroom. Is it likely or is it possible that we actually help and know that we're going to be there to start the lesson, middle of the lesson, end of the lesson, day 2 parts of the lesson with that teacher, instead of trying to bounce around to create the actual, the capacity that for, say, that teacher in that particular grade band. Like, I think that's where we want to go a little bit deeper, but not as wide. And I think what we get scared about that, we're like, well, what are we going to do about all the other teachers that we don't get to if we do it this way? And how do we support those teachers, or is it okay that we don't support these teachers? So I think we get worried about that when we're making these types of decisions. What are your thoughts about like that dilemma that we have? I know I got some thoughts, but your thoughts on the dilemma of like, should I focus in on some teachers to get depth versus leaving some teachers without support this year?
I guess I always wonder if our impact is on many, but the impact is very small, does it matter? Like, will that amount to a lot in the long run? Or would I rather spend the time this year, not the same teachers for many years, but maybe this year, I'm going to really dedicate a lot of time to teachers in a way that feels very authentic, that's very meaningful. And I'm going to build the capacity. And let's say those, even if for one coach, maybe it's 15 educators, like maybe that's realistic. Maybe it's 10 educators. I'm going to really co-teach. We're going to co-learn. We're going to be a partnership. Because if I can really support those educators in deepening their content knowledge, shifting their pedagogy, we're now building capacity across our district. So rather than, and you already, kind of gave this example where it's like, I can move everybody a little bit, but that's not really going to get us closer. I mean, it's getting us closer, but it's such a small margin that it's not going to amount to much over time. But if I really work collaboratively with, let's say, these 10 educators, those are potentially future leaders in your district. Those are teachers who may step into specialized roles like interventionists or learning support or coaches in the future. And so I think we would argue that we would rather, because we know resources are limited, time is limited, we can only do so much. I think that our recommendation would be really becoming, as you said, more narrow in our focus, having a really clear understanding of the impact we're hoping to have this year, and making sure we achieve that by leveraging our structures that are going to maximize our time and our effort.
Yeah. Is it possible? Like the structure is just it's not there to optimize. It's making it harder than it needs to be, and we have to be okay with being flexible on changing structure, redesigning structure. We have to decide: is the structure worth it? Like, is the redesign of the structure worth the goal that we're actually after? Is the structure more important, or is the goal more important? Because sometimes that's the hard conversation that you'll run up against. Be like, well, we can't change that. And then you have to ask, like, why? Like, why is it that we can't change that? Like, let's hear the reasons that we can't change this particular coaching model structure, or maybe it's a PLC structure. Like, why can't we change a component of this to make it easier for us to strengthen our goal or get towards our goal? And we have to just ask that question, like, is the structure more important for you, or is the goal more important for you? And that's one of those like, tough questions that we have to ask each other, and we have to ask the important people who help make these decisions with us.
So I guess a question we'll leave you with to consider is, have you thought about the impact you want to have this year in your role? So whether that is, at the district level in a coordinator role, or you're in a coaching role, have you clearly defined the change that you are going to support? And then ask yourself, are the structures available to us being leveraged in the best way to maximize our chance of having that intended impact? And if the answer is no, what changes might be available to you?
Great question to leave behind. And also, when you answer that question, the other thing is if you're also going like, hey, I need, and we talked about this in a previous episode too, is like, it's irresponsible for us to like just assume we know best, like based off our own experience or what we've seen in our own districts. It's like, well, what is the research out there around appropriate structure or appropriate models, or how do I design this, or what to focus on first? Like, if you're needing some of that support on decision making, then we encourage you to reach out to us. Head on over to makemathmoments.com/discovery. Like, we always set aside a few slots in our calendar a week to meet with leaders like yourself, to look at what's happening in your district, hear what the pebbles are, where we always want you to leave that particular call going like, here's my next step. We reserve some time for that every single week. So head on over to makemathmoments.com/discovery, and then you can be chatting with me or Yvette around like what it is that you're working on and what it is you could be working on or should be working on. So we encourage you to do that if you do need that, say, push or that next step.